Clara pressed the last biscuit into the stranger's hand before he even asked her name. 5 years old, dust on her cheeks, not a tear left to cry, and she was feeding him. Caleb Hayes hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected any of this. 5 children alone on the Wyoming plains, their mother 3 days in the ground, their father gone before the youngest could walk. If you've ever felt the weight of doing the right thing when everything in you says right away, this story is for you. Subscribe, follow every part to the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The wagon had no business being where it was. It sat tilted at the edge of a dry creek bed, one wheel cracked clean through the canvas top, ripped and flapping in the hot Wyoming wind, like something dying. Caleb Hayes spotted it from a quarter-mile out, a dark shape against the bleached white of the midday plain, and his first instinct was to give it a wide berth. He had places to be. Cheyenne was 3 days south. He had a contract waiting a man who owed him wages for 2 months of trail work and not a single reason on earth to stop. He kept riding. He made it maybe 200 yards past the wagon before he pulled his horse to a stop. It wasn't a sound that stopped him. It was the absence of one. Out on the Wyoming plains in July, there was always noise wind. Insects, the distant complaint of cattle somewhere. But around that broken wagon, there was nothing. A silence that had weight to it. The kind of silence that meant something had already gone very wrong. Caleb sat in the saddle for a long moment, hat pulled low, jaw tight. Then he turned his horse around. He smelled the fire before he saw it, or what was left of one. Cold ash. Someone had burned a small cooking fire recently, maybe that morning, maybe the night before. The ground around the wagon was marked with small boot prints, child-sized, too many of them. He swung down from the saddle and walked the last 30 feet on foot. "Hello?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. He hadn't spoken to another living soul in 4 days. "Anybody in there?" The canvas flap moved. A boy appeared 12, maybe 13, with dark eyes and a jaw set like a man twice his age. He put himself squarely in the opening of the wagon, both hands gripping the frame, feet planted wide. He looked at Caleb the way a person looks at something they've already decided is a threat. "We don't need help," the boy said. Caleb stopped walking. He looked at the boy, then at the cracked wheel, then at the fly-swarmed water barrel strapped to the side of the wagon that was clearly empty. "You Samuel?" he asked. The boy's eyes narrowed. "How do you know my name?" "I don't," Caleb said. "You just look like a Samuel." That wasn't true. He had no idea why he said it. But something shifted in the boy's face, not trust, not yet, but the smallest fracture in the wall he was holding up. "I'm Samuel," the boy said, "and we don't need help." "All right." Caleb didn't move. "How long has that wheel been broke?" Samuel didn't answer. "How long since you had water?" Still nothing. "How many of you are in there?" "That's none of your business." Caleb took his hat off, ran a hand through his hair, and set it back down. The sun was brutal. He could feel it pressing on the back of his neck like a flat iron. "Son," he said, and the word came out slow and plain without condescension. "I can see the tracks around this wagon. I can count boot prints. There are at least 4 different sizes. So I'm going to ask you one more time. How many of you are in there, and when's the last time any of you had water?" Samuel's jaw worked. His grip on the canvas frame tightened, then released. "5 of us," he said finally. "Water ran out yesterday morning." Caleb had 2 full canteens and a third half full on his saddle. He untied all 3 without ceremony and held them out. Samuel stared at them for a moment like a boy who had been taught not to take things from strangers, and was now fighting every instinct he'd developed over the last several days against the simple brutal fact that his younger brothers and sisters needed water more than he needed his pride. He reached out and took the canteens. "Thank you," he said. "It came out like it cost him something. Don't mention it." Samuel disappeared back into the wagon. Caleb heard murmuring, Then the sound of small hands on tin, then drinking eager, desperate drinking that told him everything he needed to know about how bad things had gotten in there. He waited. After a few minutes, the canvas flap opened wider and 4 more faces appeared. Jacob came first, 10 years old, slight, with careful dark eyes that measured Caleb the way a craftsman measures a piece of wood before he cuts it. Then Mary 8, her hair loose and tangled, a smear of dried mud on her cheek. Then a small girl Caleb would later learn was Clara, 5 years old, round-faced, clutching a biscuit in one hand that she immediately extended toward him. "You can have it," she said. "We have 2 more." Caleb looked at the biscuit, then at Clara, then at Samuel, who was watching him from behind his siblings with an expression that had started as hostility and was slowly, reluctantly becoming something else. "Thank you, miss," Caleb said. He took the biscuit with both hands, the way his mother had taught him to receive something given in kindness. "That's very generous." Clara smiled at him like he'd said something wonderful. The last child, Tom, 4 years old, smallest by a considerable measure, peered at Caleb from behind Mary's shoulder with enormous dark eyes. He didn't speak. He just watched. "My name's Caleb Hayes," Caleb said to all of them. "I'm passing through to Cheyenne." He paused. "Where are you all headed?" Samuel answered. "Laramie. We have an uncle there." "Where are you coming from?" "Medicine Bow." Caleb did the math without showing it on his face. Medicine Bow to Laramie was 70 miles, give or take. On foot with 5 children and no water in July, heat that was already pushing above 90 degrees, they would not make it. The youngest would break down first. Tom, maybe Clara. 2 days out, 3 at the outside. "Where's your mother and father?" he asked. The silence that followed was a different kind than the one he'd ridden toward. Mary looked at her shoes. Jacob looked at Samuel. Clara stopped smiling and pressed the rest of her biscuit against her chest. Tom disappeared completely behind Mary. Samuel looked at Caleb straight on and said, "Our mother is buried 3 miles back. Our father left before Tom was born." He said it the way someone says a thing they've already said too many times, flat and final and sealed against any further comment. Caleb nodded once. He didn't say he was sorry. He'd learned a long time ago that sorry didn't do anything for a person standing in the middle of what sorry was supposed to address. "All right," he said. "Let's talk about the wheel." The wheel could not be fixed. That was the plain truth of it. The crack ran through the hub itself, not the spoke, not the rim, and without a blacksmith and a forge, it was going no further. Caleb walked around it twice, crouched down to examine it, and stood back up. "Wagon stays," he said. Samuel's face went tight. "That wagon has everything we own." "I understand that." Caleb kept his voice even. "And I'm telling you, it cannot move. The wheel breaks all the way through on the trail. You lose whatever's inside when it tips. You want to keep what you own, we offload it. What's worth carrying, you carry. What isn't, you leave." "We," Samuel repeated. Caleb heard the word land. He hadn't entirely meant to say it, but it was out there now, and he didn't take it back. "I'll take you as far as Laramie," he said. "My horse can carry the 2 youngest and your goods. The rest of us walk." "Why?" Samuel asked. He wasn't being ungrateful. He was being honest. He looked at Caleb with those old before their time eyes and said, "Why would you do that? You don't know us." Caleb thought about it. The true answer was something he wouldn't have been able to fully explain, something about the way Clara had handed him that biscuit, about the look on Tom's face, about the fact that Samuel was standing in a broken wagon in 90-degree heat, insisting he didn't need help, while his 4-year-old brother hid behind his sister's back. The true answer was that he had been riding alone for 15 years and had gotten very good at it, and had started somewhere along the way to confuse very good with fine. What he said was, "Because it's the right thing to do." Samuel studied him for a long moment. Then he said, "All right, Mr. Hayes." They spent the better part of an hour sorting through what was in the wagon, It was not a wealthy family's wagon. There was bedding, 2 blankets, 1 quilt, 1 canvas roll. There was a small iron skillet, a tin coffee pot, 4 tin cups, and 3 tin plates. There was a canvas sack of flour, half full. A smaller sack of salt. 3 strips of dried beef, hard as leather. A sewing kit in a tobacco tin. A man's Bible with a broken spine and a woman's name written on the inside cover in careful handwriting, Ruth Ellen McCready. Clara carried the Bible without being asked. She held it in both arms pressed against her chest and walked to where Caleb had tethered his horse and stood there waiting the way someone waits when they've decided to trust you. Caleb loaded what he could onto the horse's back, the bedding, the cookpot, the food. He tied it all down with the extra rope he kept coiled on his saddle. Jacob watched everything he did with that precise measuring attention. After a few minutes, the boy said, "You've done this before." "Loaded a horse," Caleb said. "Moved people who needed moving," Jacob said. Caleb glanced at him. "Some." "Were they always strangers?" "Usually." Jacob considered this. "Did they ever thank you?" "Sometimes." "We'll thank you," Jacob said with a seriousness that was almost formal. "When we get to Laramie, we'll thank you properly." Caleb almost smiled. He caught it before it arrived and said, "I'll hold you to that." They set out north by northeast at a little past midday. Caleb led the horse. Tom sat in the saddle, small as a bundle of laundry, both hands locked on the pommel with the focused grip of a child who had been told to hold on and intended to take the instructions seriously. Clara sat behind him, the Bible balanced on her knees, her short legs sticking straight out on either side because she wasn't tall enough to reach the stirrups. Samuel walked on Caleb's left, just slightly behind the way a second-in-command positions himself present but not leading. Jacob walked beside Mary. Mary had taken Tom's hand before Tom was even lifted into the saddle, then released it only when she had to. She was 8 years old, and she moved through the world like she was already responsible for it. The heat was merciless. By the second mile, nobody was talking. By the third mile, Jacob's face had gone from careful and alert to pale and tight around the mouth. Mary was walking with her eyes half closed against the sun. Samuel hadn't complained once and showed no signs of starting, but his shirt was soaked through and his pace had slowed from deliberate to effortful. Caleb stopped them. "We're not making Laramie today," he said. It wasn't a question or an apology. "There's an old trapping cabin 5 miles northeast. I've slept in it before. It's standing, it's got a roof, and we'll be inside it before dark." Samuel looked at the sky, then at his siblings, then at Caleb. 5 miles. 5 miles, Caleb confirmed. "Jacob needs to rest." "I know. We'll take 10 minutes every hour. There's enough water in my canteens to get us there if we're careful." Samuel nodded. Then he said quietly so the younger children wouldn't hear, "He gets sick easy, Jacob. Ma used to—" He stopped, started again. "He needs to stay out of the worst of the heat." "Then he rides the last 2 miles, Caleb said. "Clara walks, Jacob rides." Clara, who had clearly been listening despite being 20 feet away, said from the saddle, "I can walk. I'm not a baby." "I know you're not," Caleb said. "I walked all the way from the creek yesterday and I didn't cry once." "That's impressive, miss." Clara looked at him with complete satisfaction. "I know," she said. The sky changed at the 4th mile, not dramatically. Not the way it does in stories where clouds roll in like a stage curtain and lightning strikes to mark the moment. It changed the way trouble usually does gradually, and then all at once. The color at the horizon went from white-hot to a particular shade of yellow-gray that Caleb recognized the way he recognized a rattlesnake's rattle. Not with fear exactly, but with the complete and immediate attention of someone who had learned long ago that some things deserve to be taken seriously the moment you notice them. "Samuel," he said. Samuel looked at the sky. His face went still. "That's a storm," Samuel said. "That's a storm," Caleb agreed. "How long do we have?" Caleb looked at the clouds at the speed of the wind picking up at ground level, at the way his horse had started tossing his head with short, nervous movements. 2 hours, maybe less. The cabin. 2 miles. Samuel looked at Jacob, who was riding now, eyes glassy with heat and fatigue. He looked at Mary, who had noticed the sky and was holding Tom's hand again. Tom, who had climbed down from the saddle when Jacob climbed up, and was now walking with his arms slightly extended for balance, the way very small children walk when they're tired and the ground feels uncertain. Samuel looked at Caleb. "We have to move faster," he said. "We do," Caleb said. "Can the horse carry 2? For 2 miles, yes." Tom and Jacob both. That was my thought. It was the first time Samuel had agreed with him without a pause to consider it. Caleb noted that without comment. He lifted Tom up in front of Jacob, repositioned the packs, checked the ties on the supplies, and looked back at the remaining 3. Samuel, Mary, Clara, who were standing in a line, looking at him with expressions that were each distinct and somehow each heartbreaking in their own way. Samuel resolute. Mary afraid, but refusing to show it. Clara holding the Bible and looking up at the yellowing sky with the focused concentration of a person who has decided to simply deal with whatever comes next. "All right," Caleb said. "We walk fast." "We can run," Clara said. "You don't have to run." "I know," Clara said. "But we can." Caleb looked at her for a moment. 5 years old, dusty face, her mother's Bible against her chest. "Stay close," he said, and they ran. The first gust hit them at the last half-mile, a wall of wind loaded with grit and topsoil that came horizontal and hit every exposed piece of skin like thrown sand. Tom buried his face in Jacob's back. Jacob wrapped one arm around Tom and kept the other locked on the pommel. The horse shied left, then steadied, as Caleb tightened his grip on the bridle and put his body in front of the animal's head, talking low and constant. Mary grabbed Clara's hand without breaking stride. Samuel appeared at Caleb's right shoulder and took the bridle on the other side, pulling with him, speaking to the horse in the same low tone Caleb was using instinctively without being asked, as if the knowledge had been waiting inside him for exactly this moment. "That's good," Caleb said without looking at him. "Keep talking to him." "What do I say?" "Doesn't matter, just keep your voice steady." Samuel kept his voice steady. The cabin appeared out of the dust like something dreamed, a low, dark shape against the heaving gray sky, solid and unmoving, real in a way that almost nothing had felt real for the last half-mile. Clara saw it first. She pointed. "There!" she shouted over the wind. "There it is, I can see it." "I see it," Caleb said. "We made it," Clara said. "We're not in it yet." "We're going to make it," Clara said. And the way she said it, not as a question, not as a hope, but as a simple statement of fact, made Caleb's chest do something it hadn't done in 15 years. He didn't have a name for it yet. He only knew it was there. "Move," he said. "Everybody move." They moved. The cabin door hadn't been opened in a long time. Caleb put his shoulder into it twice before the frame gave, and the door swung inward with a sound like something tearing loose. The smell hit first old ash, dry wood, trapped heat. He stepped inside, scanned the space in 3 seconds, the way a man does when he's learned to check rooms before he relaxes in them, and turned back to the door. "Get in," he said. Samuel came through first, pulling Mary by the hand. Clara came next, still holding the Bible head down against the wind. Caleb lifted Tom off the horse and carried him inside, then reached back for Jacob, who climbed down on his own and made it 3 steps before his legs gave out. Caleb caught him. Jacob grabbed his forearm and steadied himself, jaw tight, eyes down. "I'm fine," he said. "I know," Caleb said. He held the boy's arm until Jacob's legs were solid under him again, then let go. He tied the horse to the iron ring bolted into the exterior wall. It had been there since whoever built this cabin had decided their horse deserved better than standing loose in a storm, and pulled the packs off the saddle fast, moving against the wind that was now hitting in sustained bursts rather than gusts. He got everything inside and pulled the door shut behind him. The noise dropped by half. Not gone. The wind was working at the gaps in the walls, pressing through the chinking in low whistles and moans, and the shuttered window on the north wall flexed and rattled with every strong gust. But the violence of it was outside now, and they were inside, and for a moment, everyone just stood and breathed. Tom started crying. Not the loud, desperate crying of a child in immediate danger. The quiet, steady kind, the kind that only starts when the danger is over and the body finally allows itself to register what it's been holding back. He stood in the middle of the cabin floor, with both hands pressed to his face, and cried without making any attempt to stop. Mary was beside him in an instant. She knelt down, pulled him against her, and held him the way their mother probably had, both arms chin over the top of his head, swaying slightly without seeming to know she was doing it. "It's okay," she said. "We're inside. We're okay." Tom shook his head. He couldn't say what he was crying about. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe it wasn't the storm at all. Caleb didn't watch them. He turned to the fireplace stone wide enough, a rusted iron grate that was still serviceable, and started building a fire from the wood stacked against the interior wall. Dry pine, old but solid. He had tinder in his pack, and a fire started in under 4 minutes, which was faster than he usually managed, though he couldn't have said exactly why he was in a hurry. The light changed immediately. Fire did that. It wasn't just warmth. It was the visual fact of fire, the movement, and the orange light filling in the corners of a dark room. Tom's crying slowed and stopped. Clara sat down directly in front of the fireplace, cross-legged, the Bible in her lap, and looked into the flames with complete absorption, as if she'd been waiting for exactly this thing. Samuel stood in the center of the room and watched Caleb work without saying a word. Caleb pulled the food out of the pack, the dried beef, the flour, the salt, and set it on the rough-hewn table that ran along one wall. He looked at it. It was not a lot of food for 6 people. "Clara," he said. "Yes, sir," she said immediately without turning from the fire. "You told me you could cook." Clara turned around. She looked at the food on the table, then at Caleb, and her expression shifted from the soft, firelit calm of a moment ago to something focused and almost professional. She stood up, still holding the Bible, walked to the table, set the Bible down with deliberate care at the far edge, and put both hands on the table and looked at what was there. "How much flour?" she asked. "Half a sack, maybe less." "Salt?" "Small bag." "Do you have any lard? Fat, anything?" Caleb reached into the pack and came out with a small tin-dented lid sealed with old grease. He set it on the table. Clara pried the lid up, smelled it, and nodded. "I can make biscuits," she said. "And if we soak the beef in the water and boil it, it softens up. Ma used to do that." She said the last sentence the same way Samuel said things about their mother, flat and even sealed at the edges, not an invitation to comment. "That sounds good," Caleb said. "I need a bowl." Caleb gave her his tin cup and the cook pot. Clara looked at the cup, looked at the pot, and said, "This'll work." She said it with the decisive practicality of someone twice her age and got to work. The storm got worse before it got better. Around what Caleb estimated was late afternoon, the wind shifted direction, and the shuttered window on the north wall stopped rattling and went silent, which should have been a relief, but wasn't. The silence was the kind that came from pressure building on one side, and 2 minutes later, the wind hit the south wall like something with intent. The whole cabin shuddered. Tom, who had stopped crying and fallen into a light twitching sleep on the folded bedroll Mary had spread near the fire, jerked awake and grabbed Mary's arm. "It's the wall," Mary said calmly. "Just the wall." "It's going to fall," Tom said. "It's not going to fall. This cabin is older than Pa would have been. It's been standing through storms for 50 years. Tom looked at the wall. The wall shuddered again. "It's scared," Tom said. Nobody laughed. Clara, mixing flour in the tin cup at the table, said without turning around, "Buildings aren't scared, Tom." "Maybe they are," Tom said. "Maybe they just don't say so." Caleb, sitting on the floor with his back against the far wall, cleaning his rifle, not because it needed cleaning, but because having something to do with his hands kept him from pacing, looked across the room at Tom. The boy was watching the wall with something that wasn't quite fear anymore, more like concern. Compassion almost for a wall that was trying hard. "Could be," Caleb said. Tom looked at him. "Could be the cabin's been waiting a long time for something worth holding together for," Caleb said. Tom thought about this with the seriousness of a person who considers everything offered to them. Then he said, "We're worth holding together for." "Seems like," Caleb said. Clara laughed. It was quick and unguarded, the kind of laugh that surprises itself, and it moved through the room like a change in air pressure. Even Samuel, who had seated himself at the end of the table and was sharpening the small knife he kept on his belt with a whetstone he'd carried in his coat pocket, looked up and almost smiled. The biscuits were better than they had any right to be. Clara made them flat and thick, cooked in the skillet with a lid of pressed bark to trap the heat, and they came out golden on the bottom and soft inside. She handed them out with the seriousness of someone distributing something important, which she was. One each, and then she looked at the remaining two in the skillet, and divided them into halves and gave everyone a half more, doing the math in her head with the efficiency of a child who had learned early that fair mattered. She held one half out to Caleb. "You get the same as everyone else," she said. "Ma always said the person who cooks doesn't get more, but they don't get less either." "That's a fair rule," Caleb said. He took the half biscuit. "Ma had a lot of fair rules," Clara said. She picked up her own half biscuit and bit into it with a decisive, satisfied air. She was real smart. She sounds like it. She could read anything, even the hard words in the Bible. Clara chewed and swallowed. She taught Samuel and Jacob to read. She was working on Mary. She hadn't started on me yet because I was still supposed to be learning my letters, but I already know all my letters. I taught myself. She said this with the particular pride of someone who wants credit for the record. "Good for you," Caleb said. "When we get to Laramie," Clara said, "I'm going to learn to read the whole Bible, the whole thing, and then I can read it to Tom at night the way Ma used to." The fire snapped. Outside, the wind pushed against the south wall and the wall held. Caleb finished his half biscuit and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "That's a good plan, Clara." She nodded. "I know," she said. Odd. The twist came from Samuel, and it came quietly, the way the important things usually do. It was full dark by then. The storm had settled into a steady driving rain, the dust and fury of the early hours replaced by something more patient and thorough. Tom was asleep again, genuinely this time, curled into himself on the bedroll. Mary had her arm around him. Jacob was propped against the wall beside the fire, his color better than it had been on the trail, but his eyes heavy. Clara had long since fallen asleep, sitting up her back against the table leg, the Bible open in her lap to a page she'd been trying to read by firelight before the effort beat her. Caleb was on watch without having declared himself on watch. It was simply what he did in a place like this, in a situation like this, when 5 children were asleep, and the world outside was demonstrating its capacity for violence. Someone needed to stay awake and pay attention. He'd done it so many times in so many different circumstances that it no longer required a decision. He simply didn't sleep. Samuel was awake too. He'd known the boy wasn't sleeping. Samuel's eyes had been closed, but his breathing had the careful, controlled quality of someone managing it, rather than surrendering to it. When Caleb added a log to the fire and the light shifted, Samuel sat up and stopped pretending. They sat in silence for a while. The rain on the roof was steady. The fire had settled to a confident low burn. Then Samuel said, "There is no uncle in Laramie." Caleb didn't look up from the fire. "I know," he said. Samuel's head turned sharply. "You knew." "I reckoned," Caleb said. "The way you said it. The way the others didn't say anything when you said it." Clara almost said something and stopped herself. Samuel was quiet for a moment. "She's bad at lying," he said. "She's 5. "She's also just bad at it," Samuel said. "She gets a look." Caleb almost smiled. "So where are you actually going?" Samuel pulled his knees up to his chest and stared at the fire. He looked for the first time since Caleb had met him like a 12-year-old. Not a small man, not a caretaker, not a boy holding himself together by force of will. Just a boy who was tired. "I don't know," he said. "I told them we were going to Laramie because there had to be somewhere. They were scared after Ma died. Tom didn't sleep for 2 nights. Clara kept asking where we were going, and I didn't have an answer, and she kept asking, and I just—" He stopped. "I said Laramie. Is there anyone, any family anywhere? Pa had a brother in Kansas, but he and Pa didn't speak. I don't know if he'd take us." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I don't know if I'd want him to. A man who won't speak to his own brother for 8 years doesn't seem like somebody who ought to have children in his house." "That's a reasonable conclusion," Caleb said. "Ma had a cousin. We don't know where." "That's what you've got." "That's what I've got," Samuel said. Flat, factual, not asking for anything. Caleb looked at the fire. He looked at the 5 sleeping shapes around it. Tom. Mary Jacob. Clara. The slow rise and fall of breathing children who trusted that the morning would come, as children do, because no one had yet taught them to doubt it thoroughly enough. He looked at Samuel, who was 12 years old, and had buried his mother 3 days ago, and had been holding 5 people together on pure stubbornness and biscuits and the invented destination of Laramie. "In the morning," Caleb said, "we'll figure out the next step. All right, one morning at a time." Samuel looked at him. "Why do you keep doing that?" "Doing what?" "Saying we." Samuel's voice wasn't accusatory. It was genuinely asking. "You could have left us at the wagon. You said yourself you had somewhere to be." Caleb was quiet for a moment. The rain pressed on the roof. The fire breathed. "Cheyenne'll be there when I get there," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," Caleb agreed. "It's not." Samuel watched him for a long moment. Then he lay back down, pulled his coat over his shoulders, and said with his eyes already closing, "Jacob likes you." "I noticed. Mary does too. She's just slow to show it." "I noticed that too. Tom will like you by morning. He likes anyone who talks to him like he's a real person." Caleb said, "He is a real person." "I know that," Samuel said, "but not everyone acts like it." A pause. Then, "Clara already decided." "Did she?" "She decided when you took the biscuit with both hands," Samuel said. "She said—" His voice was going soft and slow, now sleep pulling him under whether he wanted it to or not. "She said that's what Ma used to do. Take things with both hands. She said it means you're paying attention." He was asleep before Caleb could answer. Caleb sat alone with the fire and the rain, and 5 sleeping children, and the fact that a 5-year-old girl had decided to trust him based on how he held a biscuit and felt something move through his chest that he still didn't have a name for. He stayed awake all night. He always did. Ted. Morning came gray and washed out and gentle. The storm had spent itself overnight, leaving behind the particular clean quiet that follows hard weather air that felt new ground, that smelled like the earth had been turned over and rinsed. Caleb was outside before any of the children woke, checking the horse, assessing the ground, calculating what the rain had done to the trail north. The answer was not good, not impassable, but soft and slow. What had been a firm 2-day walk to the first real town north of them was now closer to 3 days, and that was if the ground firmed up by midday, the way it sometimes did after a summer storm. If it stayed soft, they were looking at 4. He was still working through the math when the cabin door opened and Jacob appeared. The boy's color was better this morning, still not robust. Still that careful quality in his eyes, but steadier on his feet. He walked to where Caleb stood and looked at the sky, and then at the trail, and then at Caleb. "How bad?" Jacob asked. "Not terrible," Caleb said. "Slower than yesterday." Jacob nodded. He pulled his coat tighter, even though it wasn't cold. The kind of unconscious self-wrapping a body does when it's been through something and hasn't quite finished recovering. He stood there for a moment, looking north, and then he said without looking at Caleb, Samuel told you about Laramie. He did. Are you angry? No. Some people would be, Jacob said. Some people would feel tricked. I'm not some people. Jacob looked at him then, that precise measuring look that seemed to be the boy's default mode for engaging with the world. No, he said slowly. I reckon you're not. He said, reckon the way children say things they've heard adults say and are trying on for fit. It fit him well enough. Can I ask you something? Jacob said. Go ahead. When we get to wherever we're actually going. He paused on the phrase, acknowledging without embarrassment that Laramie had been a fiction they'd all agreed to. What happens to us? Caleb looked at the boy. Jacob was 10 years old and asking the question the way a man asks it square on, no softening, wanting the honest answer, rather than the comfortable one. I don't know yet, Caleb said. Jacob took that, turned it over. Is that the true answer, or the not yet ready answer? Both, Caleb said. Jacob nodded slowly. All right, he said. That's fair. He looked north again. I can walk today. I don't need to ride. We'll see how the first hour goes. I can walk, Jacob said firmly, in a tone that was not Samuel's stubbornness, but something different, not pride exactly, but precision. He was not claiming to be stronger than he was. He was stating an accurate assessment of his current condition, and he wanted it on record. All right, Caleb said. You walk. First hour. Jacob nodded satisfied and went back inside. Caleb stood alone for a minute longer. He'd had a contract in Cheyenne. A horse dealer who owed him $60 for 2 months of trail driving good money, clear money he'd been counting on for the winter. That money wasn't going anywhere. The dealer would still be there in a week, 2 weeks. Money didn't run like a man could run. But 5 children could not be left to sort themselves out. That was the simple fact of it. He'd known it at the wagon, and he knew it now, and he suspected he'd known it the moment Clara put that biscuit in his hands and looked up at him with her mother's careful, trusting eyes. He went back inside to wake the others. They were 3 miles up the North Trail when they found the other rider, or more accurately, when the other rider found them. He came from the east, a heavy-set man on a bay horse, moving at a pace that wasn't quite a gallop, but was too fast for casual travel. He pulled up short when he saw them, and Caleb's hand moved to his side before the thought was fully formed. The man wasn't armed or not visibly. He was dressed like a rancher, worn coat and good boots, and he had the weathered face of someone who spent his life outdoors. He looked at Caleb, then at the children, then back at Caleb with an expression that shifted through several things in quick succession before settling on something Caleb couldn't read. You're Hayes, the man said. Caleb's hand didn't move. Who's asking? Name's Aldridge, Denton Aldridge. I run the triple bar spread 8 miles east. He didn't dismount. Heard there were children traveling the North Trail this morning. Word gets around fast when you're not far from a town. There's no town within 20 miles of here, Caleb said. No, Aldridge said. But there's a homestead 4 miles east with a woman who saw your fire last night in the trapping cabin and rode out at first light. He paused. She was worried. About what? About 5 children on the North Trail with a man nobody knows. Aldridge's voice was neutral, not hostile, but not yielding either. He was reading Caleb the same way Caleb was reading him, and they both knew it. Samuel had moved up quietly on Caleb's right. He stood slightly behind Caleb's shoulder, the same position he'd held on the trail, and he was watching Aldridge with those old eyes. We know Mr. Hayes, Samuel said. Aldridge looked at the boy. Do you? Yes, sir. He helped us when our wagon broke. We'd have been in a bad way without him. Where are your parents, son? The question landed in the middle of the group, and everyone went still around it. Clara on the horse tightened her grip on the Bible. Tom pressed his face against Clara's back. Mary looked at Samuel. Samuel looked at Aldridge and said, Our mother passed. Our father isn't with us. Aldridge was quiet for a moment. And you're traveling with? He nodded toward Caleb. He's taking us north, Samuel said. He didn't have to. He chose to. Something in Aldridge's expression shifted. Not fully, the wariness didn't vanish the way wariness in a careful man never fully vanishes, but the edge of it softened. He looked at Caleb again. "There's a woman at my spread," he said. "Martha, my wife. She'd want to feed these children a proper meal before they go any further." He said it like an offer, but with a quality underneath it that made Caleb think it wasn't entirely optional. Not a threat, but the particular social weight of a decent person who has decided that decency requires a certain action and is now in the process of enacting it. Caleb looked at the children. Jacob's walk had been steady for the first hour, but he was tiring now. Caleb could see it in the way he was distributing his weight. Tom hadn't spoken since they left the cabin. Clara was watching Aldridge with the intense, unblinking focus of a child deciding what she thought about something. Then Clara said, "Is your wife a good cook?" Aldridge blinked. Then he laughed, genuine and surprised the way Caleb had laughed yesterday, and caught himself. "Yes," he said. "Yes, she is." "All right," Clara said with the decisive authority of someone closing a negotiation. She looked at Caleb. "We should go." Caleb looked at her. He looked at Aldridge. He had 20 years of reading people and the practiced instinct of a man who had survived long enough to trust his own judgment, and his judgment said, "This man means what he says." 8 miles east, Caleb said. 8 miles, Aldridge confirmed. Caleb turned to Samuel. Samuel gave a short single nod. "All right," Caleb said. He turned the horse east. "Let's go." And they went 6 people and a horse and a rancher who had ridden out to investigate and found something he hadn't expected, moving east across the washed-out, rain-cleaned Wyoming plain toward a meal and a fire. And whatever came next, because whatever came next was all any of them had, and they had learned in the last 2 days that it was enough to move toward it. The triple bar spread was bigger than Caleb had expected. Not in an ostentatious way, not the way wealthy men built things to prove they were wealthy. It was big the way something gets when it's been added to over time by people who needed more room and built it themselves piece by piece, year by year. The main house was solid and low, with a covered porch running the full length of the front. Behind it sat a barn, a bunkhouse, a smokehouse, and a chicken coop that was currently producing a considerable amount of noise. Tom noticed the chickens first. He hadn't spoken since they left the cabin, but the moment the chicken coop came into view, he turned on the horse where he sat in front of Clara and said, "Chickens," with the same tone a person might say gold. "Yes," Clara confirmed. "Chickens." "Can I look at them?" "Ask Mr. Hayes," Clara said. Tom twisted to look at Caleb, who was walking the horse beside them. "Can I look at the chickens?" "Ask Mr. Aldridge," Caleb said. "They're his chickens." Tom turned to Aldridge, who had been riding easy on their left. "Can I look at your chickens?" Aldridge smiled a wide, unhurried smile, the kind that lived on a face that had used it often. "You can look at anything you want, son." Tom nodded once, as if this had been a formal agreement, and faced forward again with the focused expression of a person who now had a plan. They were still 20 feet from the porch when the front door opened. Martha Aldridge was not a small woman, and she moved like someone who had spent 30 years in a house that needed things done and had simply never stopped doing them. She came off the porch before her husband had finished dismounting, wiped her hands on her apron, looked at the 5 children, looked at Caleb, and said, "Get down off that horse and come inside, all of you, right now." It was not an invitation. It was a command issued with the brisk authority of someone who managed a household the way a general manages a campaign, not unkindly, but without ambiguity about who was in charge of what. Clara dismounted before Caleb could help her. "Hello, ma'am," Clara said. "I'm Clara. I can cook." Martha looked at the girl for one beat. Then she said, "Good. You can help me then. Come on." Clara followed her inside without looking back. Todd. The kitchen was the center of the house, and Martha ran it like a small, efficient kingdom. Within 10 minutes, she had Jacob sitting at the table with a glass of cold well water and a piece of cornbread, had directed Mary and Tom toward the wash basin in the back hall, and had put Clara to work at the counter with a bowl of dried beans that needed sorting. She moved through the kitchen, the way experienced women move with purpose and without wasted motion, talking as she worked, her voice low and constant. "How long have you been on the trail?" she asked. "Since Medicine Bow," Samuel said. He'd come inside last after helping Caleb settle the horse in the barn. He stood just inside the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands, the posture of a boy who'd been taught to remove his hat indoors and had never forgotten it, even under circumstances that might have excused the lapse. Martha looked at him. "Medicine Bow to here. How many days?" "3. "Alone. Until yesterday," Samuel said. "Mr. Hayes found us." Martha's eyes moved to Caleb, who had stopped in the kitchen doorway behind Samuel. She looked at him the way women who've been married to practical men for decades look at strangers measuring quick thorough. "Sit down," she said. "Both of you." Caleb sat. Martha put food on the table in the way she did everything without ceremony or comment, as if feeding people was simply a thing that happened in her house and required no announcement. Salt pork and beans, and cornbread, and a crock of butter that made Clara stop sorting beans and stare for a moment before she caught herself. "Eat," Martha said. They ate. The silence at the table had a particular quality. Not the silence of people who had nothing to say, but the silence of people too hungry and too tired and too relieved to speak. Tom ate with both hands on his plate and his eyes half closed. Jacob ate slowly, deliberately, in the way of someone whose body is not quite ready to trust abundance. Mary ate and watched Martha with an attention that Martha clearly noticed, because after a few minutes she said without looking at Mary, "You can ask me something if you want." Mary looked startled. "How did you know I wanted to ask something?" "Because you've been looking at me the way my daughter used to look at me when she had a question she wasn't sure she was allowed to ask." "You have a daughter," Mary said. Something moved across Martha's face, quick, controlled, familiar. "Had," she said. "She passed 4 years ago. She was about your age." Mary went still. Then she said, "I'm sorry, ma'am." "So am I," Martha said. She said it plainly without collapsing under it. "Eat your cornbread." Denton Aldridge found Caleb on the porch after the meal. Caleb had stepped outside, not to escape anything, but because the kitchen had 6 people in it, and he was a man who'd lived alone long enough that 6 people in one room required occasional recalibration. He was standing at the porch railing, looking east at the plain that was still drying from the night's rain, when Aldridge came out and leaned on the rail beside him. They stood without talking for a moment. That was another thing about men who'd spent time outdoors: they didn't feel obligated to fill silence. Then Aldridge said, "What's the actual plan, Hayes?" "Working on it," Caleb said. "Where are you taking them?" "North. First town with a telegraph office so I can wire ahead and make some inquiries." "About what?" "Whether there's anyone in this family still standing who's in a position to take 5 children." Aldridge turned to look at him. "And if there isn't?" Caleb was quiet. "That's what I thought," Aldridge said, but not unkindly. He turned back to look at the plane. "Martha's already attached. You know that, right? She attached to the youngest one about 40 seconds after she came off the porch." "I noticed. And that little one, Clara, she's been telling Martha about her mother for the last hour. Calmly, just telling it. Like she's been carrying it around looking for somewhere to put it down." Caleb said nothing. "I'm not saying anything," Aldridge said. "I'm just telling you what I see." He pushed off the railing. "You're welcome here tonight, all of you. The bunkhouse is empty. My hands are up at the north pasture for another week. Children can sleep inside." "I appreciate it." "Don't appreciate it," Aldridge said. "Just take it." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "You got a plan for the long road, Hayes, past the telegraph office and the inquiries?" Caleb looked at the plane. "I'm working on it," he said again. "Yeah," Aldridge said. "I can see that." And he went inside. What happened at dusk was something Caleb had not anticipated. He was in the barn with the horse checking the animal's feet. The soft ground had a way of working into the frogs of a horse's hooves when he heard footsteps and turned to find Samuel in the barn doorway. The boy was holding a folded piece of paper. "I found this in Ma's Bible," Samuel said. He came forward and held it out. "I didn't know it was there. Clara was looking at the pages and it fell out." Caleb took the paper. He unfolded it carefully. It was a letter handwritten dated 14 months ago. The handwriting was the same careful script as the name inscribed in the Bible's cover. Ruth Ellen McCready. He looked at Samuel, who nodded once. He read it. It was not a long letter. A woman writing to her sister, a half-sister, the letter said, by their father's first marriage. Saying she was well, that the children were well, that she and her husband had had a hard season but were managing. Saying she hoped her sister was managing too. Saying she thought of her often. Saying if things ever got very hard, she hoped her sister would remember she had family, and that family mattered, even when it had been a long time. The letter was addressed, a name a town. Caleb looked at the address for a long moment. "Millhaven," he said. "Yes," Samuel said. "That's 60 miles north." "I know. You have an Aunt Samuel. A half-aunt anyway." Samuel's jaw worked. "I don't know if she'll want us." "You don't know she won't. She and Ma didn't. It wasn't a close connection. They'd met twice, maybe. The letter was the longest they'd talked in years." "She wrote back," Caleb said. Samuel went still. "What?" Caleb flipped the letter over. On the back, in different handwriting, less careful, slanting, written fast, were 4 lines. He read them aloud. "Ruth, I think of you more than you know. This country is big, and it makes people small, and I believe family is the only thing that answers that. You are always welcome here. Come whenever you need to. Iris." Samuel stared at the letter. He stared at it for a long time. Then he sat down on a hay bale and put his face in his hands, and his shoulders moved, and Caleb stood in the barn and looked at the opposite wall and gave the boy the only thing he could give him right then, which was the courtesy of not watching. After a minute, Samuel straightened up. His eyes were red, but his voice was even. "We have to tell the others," he said. "We do. Clara's going to—" He stopped. "She's going to be relieved. She's been so scared. She doesn't say so, but I can tell. She stopped asking questions 3 days ago, and Clara always asks questions." "I noticed that too," Caleb said. Samuel stood up. He looked at the letter in Caleb's hands. "Can I keep it?" Caleb held it out. Samuel took it and folded it precisely along its original creases and put it in his coat pocket, his hand resting over it for a moment after. "Mr. Hayes," he said. "Samuel, thank you." He said it the same way he'd said it at the wagon, like it cost something. "I know Jacob said we'd thank you properly when we got there, but I wanted to say it now too. You don't have to. I want to." He met Caleb's eyes. "You didn't have to stop. You didn't have to stay. You didn't have to do any of it." "No," Caleb said, "I didn't." "So why did you—" It was the same question he'd asked in the cabin, and Caleb hadn't fully answered it then. He thought about answering it again with the same half-truth about it being the right thing. He looked at Samuel, this 12-year-old, who had buried his mother and held 5 people together on stubbornness and love and an invented destination, and he decided the boy deserved more than a half-truth. "Because I've been moving for 15 years, Caleb said, "and when I saw your wagon, something in me stopped." He paused. "I don't know entirely what that means yet, but I'm starting to think it means something." Samuel looked at him steadily. Then he said, "Clara's right about you." "What does Clara say about me?" "She says you're the kind of man who stays." Caleb was quiet. "She's usually right about people," Samuel said, and he walked out of the barn and back toward the house. Chate. Caleb stayed in the barn another few minutes. He sat down on the hay bale Samuel had vacated and turned it over, all of it. The letter, the address, the aunt in Millhaven 60 miles north. The children around Martha's kitchen table. Clara sorting beans with the focused purpose of someone who had decided to be useful, because useful was the one thing she knew how to be when everything else was out of her control. He thought about the man he'd been 3 days ago, riding south. Cheyenne, $60 a clean contract and a clear road. He thought about the letter on the back of the letter. You are always welcome here. He thought about what Samuel said. The kind of man who stays. He stood up, picked up his hat from where he'd set it on the rail and put it on. The kind of man who stays. He walked out of the barn toward the house where light was coming through the windows, and inside he could hear over the quiet of the Wyoming evening the sound of Clara's voice talking, explaining something the way she always was, and underneath it, Martha's voice responding, and underneath that, Tom laughing. Tom laughing. He hadn't heard that before. He stopped walking for a moment and just listened to it. The small, full-bodied laughter of a 4-year-old who had found something funny, real, and unguarded, and he felt that unnamed thing in his chest again. Bigger this time, more insistent. He still didn't have a word for it, but he was starting to think he might soon. They were all in the main room when Caleb came inside. Samuel was standing in the center of the room. He'd already told them Caleb could see it in the shape of the group, the way people arrange themselves around new information. Mary had her arm around Jacob. Tom was looking at Samuel with his whole face the way he looked at things that were too big to look at with just part of his attention. Clara was standing very still. She had the letter in her hands. Samuel must have passed it to her. She was looking at it with the focused, effortful concentration of someone who was still learning to read, tracing the words with her eyes, working through them slowly. Then she looked up at Caleb. Her expression was doing several things at once: relief, grief, hope, the complex mixture of a child who has been very frightened for a long time and is only now incrementally starting to believe they might not have to be anymore. There's an aunt, Clara said. There is, Caleb said. Millhaven. 60 miles north. Clara looked back at the letter. Then she said very quietly, Ma knew. She knew if something happened, she wanted us to have somewhere to go. She put this in the Bible because she knew we'd always have the Bible. She turned the letter over, looking at the back. She read the 4 lines, slowly mouthing the words. She says we're welcome, Clara said. She says come whenever you need to. She does, Caleb said. Clara folded the letter along its creases exactly as Samuel had done and held it out to him. You should keep it, she said. You're taking us there. Samuel should keep it. Samuel will lose it, Clara said with complete confidence. He lost Ma's thimble last winter, and we never found it. Samuel said, I didn't lose it. It fell behind the... You lost it, Clara said. She held the letter out to Caleb again. Please keep it safe. Caleb took the letter. He put it in his breast pocket inside his coat against his chest. All right, he said. Clara nodded, satisfied. Then she went back to help Martha in the kitchen because there was still work to be done, and Clara did not believe in leaving work undone when there were hands available to do it, which was... Caleb was beginning to understand perhaps the most defining thing about her. The second twist arrived the next morning, and it arrived on horseback. 2 riders came in from the south at a pace that meant business, not running, but purposeful. The kind of pace that covered ground without announcing itself until it was already there. Caleb saw them from the porch before Aldridge did, and he'd already moved to where his rifle was leaning against the wall inside the door before he consciously decided to. Aldridge came out beside him and looked. I know one of them, he said. His voice had changed, not alarmed, but careful. The one on the left, that's Ren Cotter. He rides for Victor Kane. Caleb went still at the name. Victor Kane. You know him? By reputation. That was an understatement. Victor Kane's reputation had reached every trail rider and contract hand between Cheyenne and the Montana border, a landman they called him, though what he was a land thief with a lawyer and a county judge in his pocket. He bought distressed properties at a fraction of their value, and the distress was frequently of his own engineering. He'd broken 3 homestead families in the last 2 years that Caleb knew of, probably more that he didn't. What does Cotter want here? Caleb said. I don't know yet. Aldridge's jaw was set. But I've got a thought. The riders pulled up at the porch rail. Cotter was a lean man with a narrow face, and the watchful eyes of someone accustomed to carrying messages he didn't write. The man with him was younger, heavier, and said nothing. "Aldridge," Cotter said. "Mr. Kane asks after the children." Caleb felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the morning air. Aldridge kept his voice steady. "What children?" Cotter looked at Caleb, then back at Aldridge. "Mr. Kane is aware of 5 orphaned minors traveling the North Trail in the company of a contract writer. He wanted to ensure their welfare is being looked after." "Their welfare is being looked after," Aldridge said. "You can tell him that. He'd like to offer his assistance," Cotter said. "He has connections with the County Children's Board. He believes proper arrangements should be made for minors without legal guardianship." "Proper arrangements," Aldridge repeated. "Yes, sir." Caleb stepped forward off the porch, not aggressively, deliberately, with the measured confidence of a man who wants to be seen clearly. "Tell Mr. Kane," Caleb said, "that these children are traveling with family to a relation in Millhaven. Tell him their welfare is settled and his assistance isn't needed." Cotter looked at him. "You're Hayes." "I am." "You're not family." "No," Caleb said. "I'm not." He held the man's gaze. "But I'm the one standing between these children and whoever thought it was their business to track their movements. And I will be standing here until they're in Millhaven with their aunt. So you can tell Mr. Kane with my respects that these children aren't available." A long silence. Cotter looked at him, looked at Aldridge, looked at the house. "I'll relay your message," Cotter said. He turned his horse. They rode back south at the same purposeful pace they'd arrived. Aldridge said very quietly beside Caleb, "What does Kane want with 5 children?" "I don't know," Caleb said, "but it's not their welfare." He turned and went inside, and the first thing he saw was Clara standing in the hallway, just back from the front window, the Bible pressed against her chest, watching him with those calm, enormous eyes that saw more than any 5-year-old had any business seeing. She didn't ask what the men wanted. She said, "Are we leaving soon?" Caleb looked at her. "Today," he said. Clara nodded. "Good," she said. "I'll tell the others." And she turned and walked back toward the kitchen, the Bible in her arms, already moving, already purposeful, already doing the next necessary thing. Caleb watched her go. 60 miles to Millhaven. Victor Kane's riders somewhere to the south relaying a message. And 5 children who deserved to get where they were going without any more of the world falling on top of them. He went to find Aldridge and start talking about the fastest route north. They left the Triple Bar before the morning was an hour old. Martha Aldridge packed food without being asked. Cornbread wrapped in cloth-dried beef, a small crock of beans sealed with wax, 2 extra canteens filled from the well. She handed the bundle to Caleb without ceremony, and then stood back and looked at the children with the expression of a woman who had made a decision and was living with it. Tom hugged her. He walked up to her, arms out, and pressed his face against her apron, the way he'd pressed it against Mary's back in the storm, and Martha's hands came down on his shoulders and held him for a moment. That was longer than a moment. Then she let him go. "You mind Mr. Hayes," she said to all of them. "And you mind each other." "Yes, ma'am," Clara said. She had already climbed onto the horse. She was holding the Bible and looking at Martha with an expression that Caleb recognized, the look of someone storing a memory deliberately, the way you press a flower between pages, intending to keep it. "Mrs. Aldridge," Clara said, "when we're settled, can I write to you?" Martha looked at the girl for a moment. "Yes," she said. "You can write to me." Clara nodded, satisfied. Done. She faced forward. Aldridge walked Caleb to the edge of the property. He drew the route in the dirt with a stick 2 lines of fork, a town called Greer's Crossing that sat 20 miles north and would have a telegraph office and a livery and, more importantly, a road that cut northeast directly to Millhaven. "Stay off the south road after Greer's Crossing," Aldridge said. "Kane's land runs along it for 6 miles. His men work it." "Understood." "Hayes!" Aldridge straightened up. He looked at Caleb directly. Cain doesn't come after people without a reason. You said you know him by reputation. Then you know he doesn't spend effort on things that don't pay. I know that. So what does he want with 5 children who don't own anything? Caleb had been turning that question over since the riders left. He had an answer forming, not complete, not confirmed, but shaped enough that he could feel its edges. Their mother's land, he said. The claim in Medicine Bow. Aldridge went still. She had a claim. I don't know. But if she did, and if she died without a will and without named heirs, a man with the right connections to the county board could file on it before the children are old enough to know what they lost. He paused. 5 orphan children with no legal guardian are a lot easier to move around than 5 children with an adult standing over them. Aldridge looked at him for a long moment. Then get them to Millhaven fast, he said. An aunt with legal standing changes everything. That's the plan, Caleb said. They shook hands. Caleb turned north. The first 10 miles went clean and fast. The ground had firmed overnight the way he'd hoped, and they made good time, better than the day before. Better than the day before that. Jacob walked the whole first stretch without asking to ride, which told Caleb the boy's strength was coming back steadily. Samuel walked on Caleb's left in his customary position. Mary and Tom were on the horse together. Tom in front, and Tom had been talking since they left the Triple Bar in a low, steady murmur that was addressed mostly to the horse. He names things, Mary told Caleb when she caught him noticing. He's been naming your horse for the last mile. What's he settled on? Caleb asked. Mary leaned forward and asked Tom, who responded with serious deliberation. Franklin, Mary reported. Caleb looked at his horse. The horse looked back at him with the dignified indifference of an animal that had been called many things over the years and considered the matter beneath its interest. Franklin, Caleb said. He says it fits, Mary said. It does, Caleb said, and Tom, who had heard this, sat up straighter with the satisfaction of a person whose judgment has been confirmed by the right authority. It was the most normal 20 minutes of the last 4 days. Walking north on firm ground in the morning air, 6 people and a horse whose name was now apparently Franklin, nobody talking about anything important. Caleb let it run as long as it would. It ran until Clara said from the saddle without preamble, Mr. Hayes, did those men yesterday want to take us away? The walking didn't stop. Nobody broke stride. But the quality of the air changed. Caleb looked up at her. She was looking down at him with those steady seeing eyes. Not frightened. Asking. They worked for a man who might want to use your situation for his own benefit, Caleb said. He kept his voice even and plain. Yes. What situation? You children don't have a legal guardian right now. That gives certain people the ability to make decisions about you that should be yours to make. Clara processed this. Like where we live. Like where you live. But we're going to Aunt Iris. We are. And when we get there, she's our guardian. She'll need to make that official. But yes, she's family. That carries weight. Clara thought about it for another few seconds. So we need to get there before those men do something. That's right. Then we should walk faster, Clara said, and clicked her tongue at Franklin the way she'd seen Caleb do it, because Clara absorbed everything she observed and applied it immediately, which was either impressive or alarming, depending on the context. Franklin did not speed up, but the sentiment was noted. Greer's Crossing was a town. The way a collection of related intentions is a plan not quite fully realized but recognizable as what it was trying to be. A main street with a general store, a livery, a saloon that did double duty as a hotel, and a telegraph office operating out of the back of the general store behind a curtain. The man behind the telegraph key was 60 years old and moved with the unhurried competence of someone who had sent 10,000 messages and never once felt urgency about any of them. Caleb wrote the message himself. He kept it short, the kind of short that cost less, and said more. Addressed to Iris Vane Millhaven, in care of the town's general delivery. Your half-niece Ruth Ellen McCready passed. Her 5 children in my company traveling north. Expect us 3 days. Caleb Hayes. He added one line that he stared at for a moment before including it. Legal matter pressing. Come with answer ready. He slid the message across the counter. The telegraph man read it, looked at Caleb, looked at the 5 children standing in a line behind him in the general store. Samuel with his hat in his hands. Jacob reading the labels on tins with intense interest. Mary holding Tom's hand. Clara examining a bolt of blue calico fabric with the focused appreciation of someone who understood what it was worth and what it had cost, and looked back at Caleb. Family, he asked. Traveling with? Caleb said. Long road. Getting shorter, Caleb said. The man nodded and sent the message. They were at the livery trading a buckled strap on one of the horse's leads when the first trouble arrived. Not Cotter. Someone knew a man Caleb didn't recognize, heavy-set, wearing a coat that was too warm for July, and the particular stillness of someone who was used to being paid to stand and watch things. He came into the livery and stood near the door and looked at the children and then at Caleb and didn't say anything. Caleb kept working the strap. Samuel, he said very quietly. I see him, Samuel said. Same quiet. He'd positioned himself between the man and the younger children without being asked, his back straight, his hand near the knife on his belt. 12 years old, Caleb thought. He moved like he was 30. Take your brothers and sisters outside, Caleb said. East side of the street. Wait by the general store. What about? I'll be right behind you. Go. Samuel moved. He gathered the children the way he always did, efficiently, without making it a production, saying something to Jacob in a low voice that got Jacob moving without questions, picking up Tom, gesturing to Mary and Clara. They were out the east door in under a minute. Caleb stood up from the strap and turned to face the man. Help you with something, he said. The man looked at where the children had been, then at Caleb. Mr. Kane wanted me to pass along an offer, he said. His voice was flat, carefully neutral, the voice of someone delivering a script. He already sent Cotter, Caleb said. This is a different offer. The man reached into his coat and produced an envelope. He held it out. $100 for the children's safe transport to the county board in Cheyenne, where proper arrangements can be made. Caleb looked at the envelope. $100 was more than he made in 2 months on a trail drive. No, he said. Mr. Kane thought you might say that. The man didn't lower the envelope. He wanted you to know the offer stands. He also wanted you to know that the road to Millhaven crosses county land for 11 miles north of here. His men work that land. He wanted to make sure you were aware of the geography. I'm aware of it, Caleb said. He thought you might want to reconsider given that. Caleb stepped forward. Not fast, not aggressive, simply forward, closing the distance between them by half so that the man had to look up slightly to hold his gaze. Tell Mr. Kane, Caleb said, that $100 is an insult and a road is just a road. And tell him that if any of his men come within 100 yards of these children, I'll know what his interest in them actually is. And I'll make sure every county judge between here and Cheyenne knows it too. He paused. Tell him that. The man held his gaze for a moment. Then he put the envelope back in his coat. I'll relay the message, he said. He left. Caleb stood alone in the livery for 10 seconds, breathing steady, letting the anger settle into something more useful. Then he went outside to find the children. Clara was waiting by the general store door with her arms crossed and the expression of someone who had been told to wait and had been waiting and had opinions about it. What happened? She said. Man with a message, Caleb said. Delivered and declined. Was it about us? It was. What did you say? I said no. Clara studied him. Was it a hard no or a polite no? Hard, Caleb said. Clara nodded. Good. She uncrossed her arms. Jacob found crackers inside. The man gave him some because he said Jacob had a trustworthy face. He does, Caleb said. I have a trustworthy face too, Clara said. He didn't give me crackers. That seems like an oversight. I thought so too, Clara said. She held the door open with the authority of someone hosting, even though it was neither her door nor her store. Come inside. We should eat before we go. The route Aldridge had marked cut northeast from Greer's Crossing along a creek bed that had dried to a trickle in the summer heat. It was faster than the main road, and more importantly, it skirted the eastern edge of Kaynes County land by enough of a margin to matter. They made 12 miles before the light started going. Jacob walked 10 of those miles. He'd stopped telling Caleb he was fine and started simply doing it, which Caleb respected more. Samuel had gone quiet in the particular way he went quiet when he was thinking hard, not withdrawn, but internal, working something through. Around the 9th mile he said without looking at Caleb, "Tell me about the land claim." "I don't know for certain there is one," Caleb said, "but you think there is. Your mother settled in Medicine Bow for 3 years. That's long enough to file and prove a claim on 160 acres. "She never talked about land," Samuel said. "She talked about moving. She always said she wanted to get somewhere settled and stay." "That sounds like someone who filed a claim," Caleb said. Samuel walked another 20 steps. "If there's land, it belongs to us." "It does. Kane can't have it. Not if you have legal standing as her heirs. Not if there's an adult with guardianship on record before he can get to the county board." Samuel stopped walking. Caleb stopped. "That's why we have to get to Aunt Iris fast," Samuel said. Not a question. The whole picture assembling itself in front of him piece by piece, his mind doing the work the way it always did, precisely, completely not stopping until the shape was clear. "Yes," Caleb said. "And if we don't get there in time, if Kane gets to the board first—" "The land's gone and you can't prove what you can't prove," Caleb said. "But we're going to get there." Samuel looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because I'm not stopping," Caleb said. "And neither are you." Samuel held his gaze for a moment. Then he started walking again. After a few steps he said, "Ma worked that land for 3 years. She built a house on it. She planted a garden. She did it alone after Pa left with 5 children, and she never once said it was too hard." His voice was steady and factual and completely devastating. "Kane is not getting that land." "No," Caleb said. "He's not." They camped that night in a hollow off the creek bed. No cabin this time, just the open sky and a fire, and the bedrolls Caleb had been carrying since the wagon. He'd done it 100 times, and knew how to make a camp that was comfortable enough to rest in. And the children, who had been through enough by now that the ground held no terrors for them, settled in without complaint. Tom fell asleep mid-sentence, which had apparently been a lifelong habit, according to Mary. He'd be talking, she said, and then he'd simply stop, and when you looked at him, he'd be out. "He did it to a preacher once," Mary said. "In the middle of a sermon. Ma nearly died of embarrassment." Clara laughed. The real laugh again, the one that surprised itself. Jacob looked at the fire and said quietly, "I miss her." Nobody filled the silence that followed that. They let it be what it was. After a while, Clara said, "She'd be glad we found Mr. Hayes." "You don't know that," Samuel said. Not harshly, just honest. "Yes, I do," Clara said. "She used to say that the right people find you when you need them if you stay open to it." She paused. "She said our father was proof that it doesn't always work out, but she said it was still true." Caleb, sitting on the far side of the fire, heard this and said nothing. Jacob looked at him across the flames. "Do you believe that?" he asked. "That the right people find you?" Caleb thought about a broken-wheeled wagon on a bleached white plain, a small girl with a biscuit in both hands. "Starting to," he said. The twist arrived at dawn the way the worst things do, quiet and from a direction you weren't watching. Caleb woke before the others, the way he always did, with the particular alertness of a man whose survival had depended on noticing things before they became emergencies. He was up and moving before he'd fully identified what had woken him. He found out when he reached the creek bed. 2 horses tethered a quarter-mile back. He'd heard them in his sleep, the small sounds out of place that his sleeping mind had catalogued and filed under, "Attend to this." He went back to camp. Everybody still sleeping. He shook Samuel's shoulder once firm. Samuel was up in 3 seconds. "What?" "We have company. 2 riders. Not moving yet, but they came up on us in the night and stopped." He kept his voice at a breath. "Wake the others, quietly. We move in 10 minutes. Samuel nodded and started moving. What happened in the next 10 minutes said everything about who these children had become over 4 days on the road with Caleb Hayes. Nobody panicked. Nobody made noise. Mary woke Tom and held his face in her hands and said something so quietly Caleb couldn't hear it. And Tom, who had every reason to be frightened, nodded and got up. Jacob rolled the bedding with practiced efficiency. Clara, last to wake, opened her eyes, looked at Caleb's face, read it correctly, and stood up with the Bible already in her hands without being told to. 10 minutes. Everything packed, everyone standing, Franklin loaded and ready. Samuel appeared at Caleb's shoulder. "They're Cain's men," he said. It wasn't a question. "Probably." "What do we do?" Caleb looked north. The road to Millhaven was 40 miles. 40 miles of open country and 2 riders behind them who knew where they were. "We walk fast," Caleb said, "and we don't stop." "What if they follow?" "Then I deal with them," Caleb said. "Your job is the children. Mine is everything else." Samuel looked at him, that long measuring look that had started as suspicion and had traveled a considerable distance from there. "You're not going to let anything happen to them," Samuel said. "No," Caleb said. "I'm not." Samuel nodded once. Then he turned to the others and said with a calm authority that had nothing performed about it, "Stay close. Stay quiet. Keep moving. Mr. Hayes has the front. I've got the back." And just like that, all 5 children arranged themselves, Clara and Tom on the horse, Jacob and Mary flanking Samuel, bringing up the rear with the smooth, unquestioned coordination of people who had decided completely and without reservation to trust the man walking in front of them. Caleb faced north, 40 miles. He started walking. They moved fast and they moved quiet. The first hour was the hardest. The ground still soft in patches from 2 days back. Franklin working harder than usual with 2 children on his back. The morning air thick and close, in the way that meant heat was coming and coming early. Caleb kept them off the main line and along the creek bed, where the brush gave them some cover, not because he was afraid of Cain's riders, but because a man who'd spent 20 years on the open range understood that you didn't hand your position to someone looking for you when you could help it. Samuel stayed at the rear without being told. Caleb could hear him back there, the quiet, steady footfall, the occasional soft word to Mary when she slowed, the complete absence of the kind of noise a frightened person makes. He wasn't frightened. He was watchful, which was a different thing entirely, and a better one. Tom rode in front of Clara in the saddle and had gone completely silent, which was unusual enough that Mary kept glancing back at him. But when Caleb looked up at the boy's face, he saw concentration, not fear. Tom was watching the ground ahead with the focused attention of someone who had been given a job and was doing it. After a mile and a half, Jacob moved up beside Caleb. "Are they following?" Jacob asked. Quiet, straight. "Not yet," Caleb said. "Might be waiting to see which way we go. If they know about the road to Millhaven, then they'll move to cut us off rather than follow from behind," Caleb said. "That's what I'd do." Jacob absorbed this. So the danger isn't behind us. Not primarily. It's ahead. Possibly. Jacob walked another 20 steps. Then he said, "What do we do if they're waiting on the road?" "I go first," Caleb said, "and I talk to them. And if talking doesn't work," Caleb looked at the boy. Jacob looked back at him with those measuring eyes, calm and direct, and waiting for an honest answer rather than a comfortable one. "I'm good at talking," Caleb said. Jacob almost smiled. "That's not what I asked." "I know," Caleb said. "Walk." Jacob walked. They reached the northeast fork 2 hours out of camp, the place where the creek bed trail met the road that Aldridge had traced in the dirt, the road that ran straight to Millhaven, with Cain's land running parallel for 11 miles of it. Caleb stopped them at the fork and looked north. The road was empty. That meant nothing. An empty road was not a safe road. It was a road that hadn't yet shown him what was on it. "How far to Millhaven from here?" Samuel asked. 38 miles. A silence. "That's 2 days," Samuel said. "Day and a half if we push." "Can we push?" Caleb looked at Jacob, whose color was good, but whose stamina had a ceiling. He looked at Tom, who had been riding for 2 hours and would need to walk some, or Franklin would tire. He looked at Clara, who was already looking back at him, with the expression of someone who had heard the whole conversation and was about to volunteer for something. "I can walk all day," Clara said. "I know," Caleb said. "Tom can too if you hold his hand on the hard parts." Tom from the saddle said, "I can hold my own hand." "You can't hold your own hand," Clara said. "That's not how hands work." "It is how hands work." "It is not, Clara," Caleb said. Clara stopped, looked at him. "Save it," he said. "We need the energy." Clara pressed her lips together, nodded. "Fine," she said. "But I'm right." "You're often right," Caleb said. "Walk." The first cane rider appeared at mile 4. He was alone, which was either a good sign or a very bad one, a single man sent to watch rather than confront, or a single man sent ahead of others. He sat his horse at the side of the road and watched them come without moving, without speaking, until Caleb was close enough that there was no pretending not to see each other. Caleb kept walking. He kept his pace, kept his hands visible, kept his eyes on the man. "Hayes," the rider said. "You know me," Caleb said. "That saves time." "Mr. Kane would like a word." "Mr. Kane can write me a letter," Caleb said. He didn't stop walking. The rider moved his horse sideways, not blocking the road but suggesting it. "Mr. Kane says the children are wards of the county until a legal guardian is established. He says transporting them without authorization is unlawful." Caleb stopped. He turned and faced the rider fully. Behind him, he heard the children stop, no noise, no shuffling, just the immediate stillness of 5 people who had learned to read his signals. Their mother's letter names their aunt as family and expresses her wish for her children to be in her care. Caleb said, "That letter is in my possession. Their aunt has been contacted and is expecting them. They are traveling to family." He paused. "That is not unlawful. What's unlawful is interfering with it." The rider's jaw tightened. Mr. Kane is not the law," Caleb said, "and he knows it. That's why he sent you instead of a sheriff." He took one more step forward. "If he had legal standing in this matter, there'd be a badge on your coat. There isn't. So move aside." A long moment. The rider looked past Caleb at the children. His eyes stopped on Samuel, who was standing at the back of the group with his hand on his knife and his feet planted wide, looking back at him with an expression that was not hostile but was absolutely unequivocal. The rider moved his horse aside. Caleb walked. The children walked. Nobody spoke until they were a quarter-mile past him, and then Clara said in a voice that had been waiting patiently for exactly this amount of distance, "That was very good, Mr. Hayes." "Thank you, Clara." "You didn't raise your voice once." "No need." "Ma always said the loudest person in a room is usually the most frightened," Clara said. "You weren't frightened at all." "A little," Caleb said. Clara looked at him. "Really, fear's useful," Caleb said. "Keeps you sharp. The trick is not letting it do your talking." Clara turned this over with the seriousness she gave everything worth thinking about. "That's going in my head," she said, "for later." "It'll keep," Caleb said. The second rider found them at mile 9. He wasn't alone. There were 3 of them, and they came from the east across open ground moving fast, which meant they hadn't been waiting on the road they'd been watching from cover and had decided that one man hadn't been enough. Caleb heard them before he saw them. The particular sound of horses moving at purpose across dry ground coming in from an angle. He turned. 3 riders, closing fast. "Samuel," he said, "I see them. Get everyone off the road. East side into the brush now. Samuel moved. He had the children moving before the word now had fully left Caleb's mouth. Mary and Tom off the road. Jacob close behind Clara, sliding off Franklin's back and hitting the ground running with the Bible under her arm. Samuel was last, and he went without argument, which told Caleb the boy trusted him completely, which was something he felt in the center of his chest, and didn't have time to examine. Caleb stood in the middle of the road. 3 horses pulled up 10 feet from him, raising dust. The man in the center was older than the others, 50s solid, with the kind of face that had been making difficult decisions for a long time and had stopped flinching at them. He wore no badge. He wore a gun. "Hayes," the man said. "That's me. I'm Garrett. I run operations for Mr. Kane." He looked at the brush where the children had gone. He looked back at Caleb. "This has gone on long enough." "It ends in Mill Haven," Caleb said. 30 miles from here." "It ends here," Garrett said. "Kane has paperwork filed with the county board, signed this morning. He has standing to take these children into protective care until a court hearing." Caleb's blood went cold. He didn't let it show. "On what grounds?" "Abandonment," Garrett said. "The claim is that these children were found unsupervised and have no established guardian. Kane has petitioned to be named interim custodian. Their aunt is their guardian. She hasn't been recognized by any court," Garrett said. "Until she is, Kane's petition stands." Caleb looked at the man. He was telling the truth, some version of it anyway. Kane had moved faster than Caleb had calculated. The telegraph message to Iris had been sent less than a day ago. Kane's filing was already done. He had 30 miles to cover, and no idea how much time before whatever Kane had filed became actionable. "How long before the filing is reviewed?" Caleb said. Garrett paused. He hadn't expected the question. 48 hours, he said. "Court convenes day after tomorrow. 48 hours, 30 miles. "Then we have time," Caleb said. Garrett shook his head. "Hayes, don't do this the hard way." "I'm not doing anything," Caleb said. "I'm walking 30 miles to deliver 5 children to their family. That's all I've done from the start. If Mr. Kane wants to contest the aunt's guardianship in court, he's welcome to. But those children will be in Millhaven when the court convenes, and their aunt will be standing in front of that judge, and Kane's petition will fall apart the moment she does." He held the man's gaze. "You know that. He knows that. That's why you're here instead of at the courthouse." Garrett looked at him for a long moment. "You're making an enemy," Garrett said. "I've made worse," Caleb said. Another moment. Then Garrett turned his horse. The other 2 followed. They rode back east the way they'd come, and the sound of the horses faded, and Caleb stood alone in the road until they were gone. Then he turned to the brush. "Come out," he said. They came out Clara first because Clara was always first. Then Tom holding her hand, then Mary and Jacob together, then Samuel, who came out last and stood in front of Caleb and said, 48 hours. "Yes." 30 miles. "Yes." "We have to walk through the night," Samuel said. "Part of it." Samuel nodded. He turned to the others. "We're walking through the night," he said. "Some of it." Tom looked up at him. "In the dark. We'll have the stars," Samuel said. "And Mr. Hayes has been doing this his whole life." Tom looked at Caleb. "You've walked in the dark your whole life." "Enough of it," Caleb said. Tom considered this. "Okay," he said. "I can do that." "I know you can," Caleb said. They walked until the stars were high and the road was silver gray and quiet. Caleb put Tom and Clara on Franklin for the night stretch and kept the others close. Jacob on his right, Mary just behind Samuel, ranging back and forth between the front and rear in the unconscious patrol pattern he'd developed somewhere over the last 5 days. The boy never fully rested. Caleb recognized the quality because he'd had it himself for 20 years and understood both its value and its cost. Around midnight, Jacob fell into step beside him and walked in silence for a while, and then said, "I've been thinking about the land. What about it? If Ma filed a claim, and it's ours, all 5 of us, what do we do with it? He wasn't asking in an avaricious way. He was asking the way Jacob asked everything, with the precision of someone who wanted to understand the full picture. That'll be up to you and your aunt, Caleb said, and up to what the land is worth and what you want to do with it when you're grown. Samuel would want to work it, Jacob said. He's like that. He wants something of his own to tend. What do you want? Jacob was quiet for a moment. I want to read everything, he said. I want to go to a real school. I want to understand how things work. A pause. Is that a foolish thing to want? It's the least foolish thing I've heard anyone want in years, Caleb said. Jacob looked at him. What did you want when you were my age? Caleb thought about a boy in Missouri, 32 years back, standing on a riverbank watching flatboats go by and wanting to be on one. To move, he said. I just wanted to move. And now? The question landed in the dark between them and sat there. Caleb looked at the road ahead, silver and quiet, and leading north to a town he'd never been to, where a woman named Iris was waiting, with an answer he'd already decided to trust. He thought about what Samuel had told him Clara said. The kind of man who stays. I reckon that's changing, he said. Jacob nodded, slow and satisfied. Good, he said. And he didn't say anything else because Jacob knew when a thing had been said completely and didn't need adding to. Dawn found them 12 miles out. They stopped for an hour at a shallow stream. Caleb let Franklin drink, let the children rest, passed out the last of Martha's cornbread and the dried beef. Nobody complained about the food. Clara ate her portion with the focused efficiency of someone refueling, then immediately asked if there was more, was told there wasn't, and accepted this with the philosophical equanimity of a person who had learned to be grateful for what was there, rather than miserable about what wasn't. Ma used to say hunger makes you appreciate the next meal more, Clara said. Your ma said a lot of smart things, Mary said. She had a lot of time to think, Clara said. She said thinking was what you did when your hands were busy. She said her best ideas came while she was washing dishes. She paused. I think about her when I'm washing dishes. Nobody said anything. Then Tom very quietly said, I think about her all the time. Clara reached over and took his hand. No words. Just that. Caleb looked away from them, not because it was too much, but because it was exactly right and belonged to them. The last twist came 8 miles from Millhaven at a crossroads Caleb hadn't known was coming. A wagon sat at the junction, stopped, not broken, deliberately. Stopped the way a wagon stops when the person in it is waiting for something. A woman stood beside it, not young but not old, with a straight back and the look of someone who'd been standing for a while and intended to stand until the thing she was waiting for arrived. Caleb slowed. The woman looked at him, then past him at the children, and her face changed. It changed the way faces change when something you've been hoping for and dreading in equal measure finally appears in front of you. Relief and grief and love, arriving all at once, too fast to organize into anything composed. She said, Ruth's children. Her voice broke on the last word. Clara was off the horse before anyone said anything. She hit the ground and ran, not with abandon, but with the direct, purposeful run of a child who has identified the right person and is going to them immediately. And she stopped 2 feet from the woman and looked up at her and said, Are you Aunt Iris? The woman looked down at her. Her eyes were wet. Yes, she said. Clara put her arms out. Iris Vane, who had ridden 12 miles from Millhaven at first light, because she'd gotten a telegraph message the night before and hadn't slept a minute since, went down on her knees in the road and held the girl who was her half-sister's youngest daughter, the one she'd never met, the one she'd written 4 lines to on the back of a letter 14 months ago, not knowing if they'd ever matter. They mattered. Tom was next. He walked to them with the careful dignity of a 4-year-old approaching something important, and Iris opened her arm and took him in without releasing Clara. And then Mary was there, and Jacob, and finally Samuel, who stopped a foot away and stood very straight and looked at this woman he'd never seen with his old careful eyes. Iris looked at him over the heads of his siblings. "You're Samuel," she said. Her voice was steady now. She'd gotten it back. "Yes, ma'am. Your mother wrote to me about you. She said you were the one who kept everyone together." Samuel's jaw worked. "I tried," he said. "She said you were 12 going on 40. Iris almost smiled. She was right. Samuel looked at her for one more moment. Then he moved forward and let her arm come around him, and he put his face down, and for the first time in 5 days, he stopped holding himself up. Caleb stood in the road and watched. He stood back from it, the way he'd stood back in the barn, the way he'd looked away at the stream, giving them the space that was theirs. But he didn't leave. He stayed where he was, hat in his hands, and let it be what it was. After a while, Iris looked up at him. "Mr. Hayes," she said. "Ma'am, I got your message last night." She released the children slowly, one at a time, smoothing hair and straightening collars the way women do when their hands need something to do and comfort runs out of words. It said a legal matter was pressing. "It is," Caleb said. He explained it briefly, Cain the filing the 48 hours, the court convening the next morning. He kept it plain and factual and watched her face as he talked. She listened the way a person listens when they've already made up their mind and are gathering information to act on rather than decide with. When he finished, she said, "I have a lawyer in Millhaven. He's been waiting since 6 this morning. I wasn't entirely sure what I was riding out to meet, but I knew it wasn't simple." "No," Caleb said. "It wasn't." "Can Cain's petition succeed?" "Not if you file as guardian today and appear in court tomorrow. His whole claim rests on there being no legal family available. The moment you're on record, it falls." Iris nodded. Then she said, "Will you come to Millhaven? The lawyer will want to speak with you. You've been with the children for 5 days. Your account of the circumstances matters for the filing." "Yes," Caleb said. "I'll come." The lawyer's name was Alderman, and he worked out of a small office above the feed store on Millhaven's main street. And he was the kind of man who asked clear questions and wrote fast and didn't waste anyone's time. He asked Caleb everything: how he'd found the children, what condition they were in, who Cotter was, and what he'd said, what Garrett had said at the road, whether Caleb had the letter from Ruth McCrady's Bible. Caleb put the letter on the desk. Alderman read both sides of it. He looked at the date, the names, the 4 lines on the back. He set it down with the precise care of a man who understood what a piece of paper could mean in a courthouse. "This establishes intent," he said. "The mother's expressed wish that her sister be considered family, combined with Ms. Vane's presence and willingness to file Cain's petition, is substantially weakened." He looked at Caleb. "You've been acting as a de facto protector of these minors for 5 days. In combination with the letter and Ms. Vane's filing, the court will have no reason to consider them unguarded." "Good," Caleb said. Alderman looked at him over the top of his glasses. "Mr. Hayes, you're not named in any of this legally. You have no obligation to be here tomorrow." "I know that," Caleb said. "But you intend to be." "Yes." Alderman wrote something down. "All right," he said. The courthouse the next morning was the most formal room Caleb had been in for years. He sat in the 3rd row behind Iris and Alderman, and the children, all 5 of them, in a line, scrubbed and straight-backed in the cleaned and mended clothes Iris had produced the night before, with the focused efficiency of a woman who had decided these children would appear before a judge looking like what they were, which was a family, and nobody was going to argue otherwise. Clara had her Bible. Cain's lawyer was a thin man with a careful suit and the expression of someone who had expected an easier morning. He presented the petition. Alderman countered with the filing the letter and a clear account of the 5 days from broken wagon to courtroom. The judge, a solid woman in her 60s who had been on the bench for 20 years and clearly did not enjoy having her time spent on matters that should have been settled before they arrived, read everything she was given with complete attention. Then she looked at Cain's lawyer over her glasses. Your client's petition is based on the claim that these minors had no available family, she said. Ms. Vane is sitting in my courtroom. The children's mother expressed in writing a wish for family connection. There is a letter. There is a guardian ready to file. She set the papers down. On what grounds does this petition have merit? Kane's lawyer said something about county procedure and proper documentation timelines. The judge listened. Then she said, "Petition denied. Ms. Vane, your guardianship filing is approved pending standard review. These children are in your legal care effective immediately." She looked at the children over the rims of her glasses, and something in her face softened briefly, the way a judge's face softens when the outcome is the right one. Court adjourned. Clara exhaled audibly. Tom said, "Is it over?" "Yes," Clara said. "It's over. Can we go home?" Iris, who was still looking at the judge's retreating back with the expression of a woman who had just watched a threat dissolve, looked down at Tom. "Yes," she said. Her voice was thick. "We can go home." Caleb was standing on the boardwalk outside the courthouse when Samuel found him. The boy came through the door alone, hat in hand, and stopped beside him. They stood together for a moment, looking at the street, the way they'd stood together at the beginning of every morning for 5 days. "She filed," Samuel said. "I heard. Kane's petition is gone." "Good. Alderman says the land claim in Medicine Bow can be established through the court. He thinks we have a strong case if we can get Ma's filing records from the land office." "He's right," Caleb said. "You should pursue it." Samuel nodded. He turned the hat in his hands. Then he said, "What are you going to do now?" Caleb had been standing there thinking about exactly that. Cheyenne was still south. The horse dealer still owed him $60. He had a contract and a road and 15 years of knowing how to leave a place when it was time. He looked at the street, at the town, at the window of the building across the way, where he could see through the glass, Clara sitting next to Iris with the Bible open on her lap, her finger tracing the words, her mouth moving, learning to read the whole thing the way she'd said she would. "I don't know yet," he said. Samuel looked at him. "That's not the same answer as last time," Samuel said. "No," Caleb agreed. "It's not. Last time you said you were working on it. I'm still working on it." Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he said carefully the way he said things that mattered. "Aunt Iris's place has a barn that needs fixing. The roof on the east side is going." He paused. "Alderman says it'll take a few weeks to sort the land claim paperwork." Caleb looked at him. Samuel looked back. 12 years old, steady eyes, completely serious. "A few weeks," Caleb said. "Give or take." "That's a long time to stay in one place." "Yes," Samuel said. "It is." And he waited. Caleb looked at the window again. Clara had looked up from the Bible and was looking back at him through the glass with those eyes that saw everything. And when she saw him looking, she lifted one hand, not a wave, exactly more, an acknowledgement the kind you give a person who belongs where they are. Something in his chest settled, not the unnamed restlessness he'd been carrying since he turned the horse around at the wagon. Something quieter. Something that felt for the first time in 15 years like the opposite of moving. "I'll look at the barn," he said. Samuel's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did a barely perceptible easing the release of a tension that had been held so long it had stopped announcing itself. "All right," Samuel said. He put his hat back on and opened the courthouse door. "Clara will make lunch. She'll tell me she's a better cook than she is," Caleb said. "She is as good as she says," Samuel said. "She was just born knowing it." And he went inside. Caleb stood on the boardwalk one moment longer. He looked south at the road to Cheyenne at the $60 and the contract and the clean, unencumbered life of a man with no attachments and nowhere he had to be. Then he turned north toward the building with the light in the window and the sound even from here of a small girl's voice reading words aloud to anyone who would listen. He put his hat on. He went inside. In the heart of the Wyoming plains, where the summer scorched and the storms raged and a man could ride for 100 miles without seeing another soul. Caleb Hayes had stopped moving, not because he was tired, not because he had nowhere left to go, but because he had found beside a broken wagon on a bleached white road the only thing that had ever been worth stopping for. And this time, for the first time in his life, he was smart enough to know it. He stayed.